training program principles, including frequency, intensity, time, type, progression, specificity, individuality, diminishing returns, variety, maintenance, overtraining, and detraining are all training principles. Okay? So frequency refers to how often training sessions occur. So for significant improvement to be made, training must occur at least 3 times per week. This does depend on what type of training you are undergoing. So generally for things such as aerobics, so if you're training for a marathon, for instance, in order to maintain your current level, so say you've done a marathon before or a half marathon before, if you want to maintain that level, you're right, you want to keep running at least twice a week, maybe doing like 15 kilometers a week or something like that, or 18 kilometers. Okay, you must do it at least 2 times a week to maintain, and in order to improve, you must train at least 3 times a week, okay? So this can depend on the type of training you're doing. So things such as plyometrics, sorry, it took me a second to remember that. Plyometric training, often you may not need to do at least 3 times a week, you might do a bit less, so 2 times a week to actually improve. But for the majority of training methods, which we'll look at, I think we're looking at today, actually we will look at soon, aren't we? We'll look at it. Let me just make sure we are. No, I don't think we are. So there are many different training methods. We're not doing them today because it will take quite a long time to actually get through them all, but there are things like fartlek, aerobic training, plyometric training, flexibility training, all of those. In order to improve, you generally must train at least 3 times a week for most of them. We'll probably go through this in school and go into more detail on it. Something else I want to note just on the slide here is that there are many different training program principles. So FITTPS. It's hard to remember all of these. So I generally remember or teach my students spit off. So we've got specificity, progression, intensity, diminishing returns, overtraining, diminishing returns and detraining, overtraining, and frequency. So as long as you remember most of them, you'll be fine, because often the short answer questions ask you to detail 2 training program principles, which you can modify. So they might be like, okay, this person wants to improve aerobic power, they're using fartlek training, or they're doing continuous training whereby they're running 3 kilometers. How can they apply training program principles in order to improve? And so what you'll do is go, okay, they can improve 2 to 10% using S, which is specificity, progression, intensity, duration, overload, frequency. So they might increase the time of the training by 2 minutes, depending on how long the training sessions are. Or they might incorporate less rest, or they might increase the amount of kilometers they run. Stuff like that. They usually increase it using these principles. Okay, so that's what we have here, training principles. They help you to improve your training and kind of get ready for a big race or something like that. Okay, back to frequency. 3 times a week is good to improve. Okay, time and duration. So duration can refer to either the length of a training session or the length of an overall training program. And so continuous training sessions should last for at least 20 minutes. So we haven't discussed this yet, but when you do continuous training, you need to have sessions last at least 20 minutes. They might go on a bit longer. But sometimes you might get a VCAR question where it goes, this person is continuously training or doing continuous training and they're running for 16 minutes. And so that's an obvious flaw. And so you need to point that out and go, okay, there is an error here in this person's training program. They're only conducting continuous training for 16 minutes as opposed to at least 20. And so it's a really common theme in the exam. You often get asked to identify flaws in a training program and rectify them and discuss how you change the training program, and you have to apply these training principles to fix it. A strategy called tapering can be used if competition occurs during a training program. And so this involves reducing training load in the weeks before the competition to reduce fatigue. So I know if I run a big race, if I do an 18 kilometers, I'm going to feel really sore the next day, right? Or even I often have trouble sleeping after a big run. So you might want to taper or reduce the amount of kilometers or whatever you do before a big event, because if you don't do that, you might actually have fatigue, and this fatigue may actually impede upon your performance for your big day. So you might want to taper, and so this is reducing that. So it's not detraining or we haven't detraining yet, but it's not detraining. It's really just reducing the amount of training beforehand, a week or a few days beforehand, so that you don't feel fatigued or as fatigued. Oops. Okay, so another big one is intensity. Okay, this is a very big table and it looks quite complex, and I don't like saying this, but I would highly recommend you guys memorize this whole table, or most of it. I would say you don't have to know the VO2 max section, but you do have to know most of this. So I'd recommend taking a screenshot of this, or taking the slide and then cropping the picture from the slide and just printing it out and putting it to your workbook, or creating a fill in the blanks type question where you can actually block out sections to remember what corresponds in each column or block. Okay, it's really important. So I'm going to work through it. Let me just take the time so we're going well. Okay, so in terms of training zone, we've got the recovery zone here. So when recovering, we're going to be using the aerobic system. Our maximal heart rate, or the heart rate we'll be enlisting during this recovery, is a heart rate of less than 70% max heart rate. In terms of VO2 max, it's less than 50, and important benefits we don't really discuss here. It really depends on what your school's done so far. So if your teacher's been using VO2 max as a measure of intensity, I would stick with that. I know I just said don't use it, but if your school does that, I recommend sticking with it. If your school uses maximum heart rate as a measure of intensity, I would recommend sticking with that instead. I personally just have always used maximal heart rate instead of VO2 max, so I just find it easy to remember this. So make sure you understand this. If you have no idea what I'm talking about when I say percentage of VO2 max, just ignore this column, okay? Which is fine. You only need to know one of these two. Okay, so in terms of the aerobic training zone, we'll be using the aerobic system. So our percentage of max heart rate is going to be 70 to 85. Okay, so your heart rate is going to be about 70 to 85% max heart rate. It's not going to be a heart rate of 85 beats per minute or 70 beats per minute. It's 70 to 85% of maximum heart rate in beats per minute. So 220 take age. If I am okay, well, I'm 21 years old. I'm just going to say 20 to make this more simple. If I'm 20 years old, okay, my maximal heart rate is going to be 220, take age. So 220 take 20 is 200. So my maximal heart rate is something like 100 and, if I have 70% of that, it's going to be something like 140 to 100 and, 70 or something like that, okay? So knowing that this is a range, it's not the heart rate, okay? So the percentage of max heart rate is going to be a range. That was a very convoluted answer. I hope that made sense, you guys. Just make sure you understand it's not heart rate in general. This isn't 75 beats per minute, it's the max heart rate. Okay, enough on that. I've spent a long time on that. This is the percentage of VO2 max, same kind of idea. In terms of the aerobic system here, this is aerobic, using the aerobic system when exercising. So this trains aerobic system and aerobic power. Make sure you understand this is aerobic power. That shouldn't say capacity. I'm just going to cross that out. Power. This, when it says recovery, it's really like that slow jog or that walk around the pitch up. You're still using the aerobic system. It's just a lower maximum heart rate you're using. In terms of lactate inflection point, this uses the aerobic system. You've got 80 to 85% of max heart rate. And then important benefits, it increases lactate inflection point. Anaerobic, this is the anaerobic system, anaerobic training zone. You'll use the anaerobic glycolysis system or the ATP PC system, okay? And so in terms of the maximum heart rate here, it's 85 to 95% for the anaerobic glycolysis system. And we know the ATP PC system is pretty much used in those short, super fast bursts of energy. That's 95% plus max heart rate, okay? Key thing to remember here is just include the word max heart rate after the percentage of max heart rate, okay? You've got the corresponding VO2 maxes as well, which I'm not going to discuss. Just memorize them if you need to. And then the whole point of the anaerobic system, it increases the anaerobic capacity and lactate tolerance. So if you are a 400-meter runner, and so it's a short race, just one lap around the athletics track, right? This is an event which uses which uses the system, the anaerobic glycolysis system, okay? It's a highly anaerobic system. It produces lactate, okay? Because this is a short distance, it's going to be using the anaerobic systems, predominantly the anaerobic glycolysis system, and you're going to be producing lactate. So in order to train, you want to do anaerobic training, okay? So you want to use this anaerobic training zone. So if I am an athlete training for the 400-meter race, I'm going to be going, okay, well, I know the 400-meter race is quite a short event. It uses the anaerobic glycolysis system predominantly, okay? Therefore, my max heart rate would be 85 to 95%. If you want to use VO2 max, you can use that, but I'm not going to do that. I know that if I'm using the anaerobic glycolysis system, I'm going to be producing lactate, okay? Lactate's all well and good, but this comes with those horrible H+ ions. They're not horrible, but in the context of PE, they can cause fatigue. So those H+ ions cause fatigue, and they're associated with lactate. So I'm just going to say, okay, I need an increased lactate and hydrogen ion tolerance, okay? And so this will help me get better. If I can tolerate this lactate and hydrogen ions better, I won't be as fatigued. So if I can tolerate it, my training, my event will be a lot better. I'll improve massively. And so you can look at this table and go, okay, in order to train for this 400-meter event, I'm going to have to do some training in the anaerobic zone. I'm going to have to work at a percentage of my maximum heart rate of 85 to 95%. So it could be that you go out and run for 20 minutes every day, or like on and off. So like 1 minute running, 85 to 95% max heart rate, and then 1 minute walking. 1 minute running, 85 to 95% max heart rate, and 1 minute walking. Just kind of doing that on and off. Okay, so kind of like a fartlek method maybe. And this will help you to train this particular system, okay? And it helps you to actually build like endurance and like tolerate that lactate and hydrogen ions and increase your anaerobic capacity in general. So as a result, this is how you can train for that system, or train that system for that particular event. On the other hand, if I am training for a marathon, I might go, okay, well, I know the marathon is an aerobic energy system user, I guess, or predominantly use the aerobic system. Our percentage of max heart rate for this marathon is going to be 70 to 85% max heart rate. As a result, I'm going to have to train in this zone. So you can use this table and go, okay, if I know my age is this, and I find my max heart rate to be 200 beats per minute, I can train at like, 140, 150. That would be within this particular range. Good, okay. Going on from that, I can just train like that 3 times a week, because we know that training 3 times a week is really important in order to reap benefits. If you do that 3 times a week, you're going to start to see improvements in your aerobic system, and therefore you're going to start to improve as you progress towards actually running your marathon or your half marathon, okay? Because you'll be training your aerobic system and your aerobic power, okay? So this table is actually really useful, even in terms of just a general context, like outside of PE. So if you are interested in training, you can use this table and the other data we've actually used in these slides to actually create a training session or a training program. Okay, that was quite a lot of explaining, and I hope it made sense. If it doesn't make sense, please put in some questions in the chat right now. It's a bit of a hard table to explain, but I'll try and explain it a bit differently. Okay, let's check time. Okay, we've got about half an hour left. Yeah, put any questions in the chat, you guys, and I will message back as soon as I can. Okay, so we had that big table. Once again, I recommend memorizing this. Knowing these percentages is really important. The rest of this you can kind of just figure out by yourself, but memorizing either this column or this column is really important, okay? You need to know these percentages. Okay, continued. The difference between lactate inflection point and lactate tolerance is really important. So lactate inflection point, or LIP, is the last point at which lactate production and lactate removal in the body are balanced. After this point, lactate will accumulate in the body and the associated buildup of hydrogen ions will cause fatigue. When lactate inflection point is increased, a person can work at a higher intensity while still producing ATP aerobically, meaning less fatigue, and this is trained aerobically. On the other hand, lactate tolerance is when a person's ability to keep working at high intensity despite the buildup of lactate and the associated feelings of fatigue, and this is trained anaerobically. So you can keep running through that lactate. So you produce lots of lactate and you can keep working through it, okay? So you've got 2 different types of lactate-related principles here. Lactate inflection point, the last point at which lactate production and removal in the body are balanced. So lactate will accumulate in the body and the associated buildup of hydrogen ions will cause fatigue. And then lactate tolerance is a person's ability to keep working at high intensity, and you just kind of work through that lactate. So you feel fatigued and you go, okay, it hurts, my muscles are hurting, but I'm going to keep going anyways. And so you've got to work or train aerobically in order to better deal with this. Okay? I've got a nice graph here, so you might have to identify it on your exam, or you might have done this in a stack previously, the lactate inflection point. It's here. So generally, you just go about life, you are using your anaerobic glycolysis system. As a result, your body is producing lactate. But because you're not working at a high intensity right now, your body can kind of just cycle it out and get rid of it, which is quite useful. But when you start to work anaerobically and you're working at a higher intensity, your body just produces so much lactate and hydrogen ions that you can't really deal with it, and so it starts to build up, and so this causes fatigue, and so you have to slow down. So if you imagine when you're going running, right, the first 10 seconds are fine. After this, you start using your anaerobic glycolysis system, and it goes, oh, okay, I'm getting a bit puffed out now. You've got to slow down a bit, and you need to slow down in order to allow that oxygen to get into your body, and start to cycle out those metabolic fatigue byproducts. So that's the last point at which that lactate entry and removal from blood is balanced, and after that, the lactate starts to build up. So just to sum up, all here, this area here, this region, this is when your body produces lactate, your body gets rid of lactate. Produces it, gets rid of it, and it just is a flat line, okay? But as you start to increase your intensity, your body starts to build up so much, and you're trying to get rid of it, and it's getting rid of some of it, but it just keeps building up, okay? So making sure you understand that. Whereas lactate tolerance is whereby you are producing the lactate, but you're just dealing with it. Whereas improving your lactate inflection point means you can continue for a longer period of time before you start to actually feel that lactate build up, because your body becomes more efficient at actually removing it. Once again, I think, the underlined here. So whatever is underlined here is very important. So knowing that lactate inflection point, improving it or increasing it is trained aerobically, whereas lactate tolerance is trained anaerobically. Cool. If you have any questions, just pop them in the chat. Okay, type of training. This refers to whether the training is aerobic or anaerobic and is largely determined by the training method used. So progression or overload. This refers to increasing training difficulty to ensure that fitness improvements continue to occur. If the same training sessions are continuously performed, the athlete will stop gaining fitness improvements. Okay, so we've got two types here. The golden rule, overload is never overload by more than 10%. Generally, we overload by 2 to 10%, and also only one variable, such as the number of reps, should be overloaded at any one time. Okay, so I'm going to go over this a bit. So type, pretty straightforward. Is the training aerobic? Is it anaerobic? Just figure that out. Regression or overload. This refers to increasing training difficulty to ensure that fitness improvements continue to occur. If the same training sessions are continuously performed, the athlete will stop gaining fitness improvements. So a VCA is usually quite fair with these type of questions. So you might get a big training program and you need to help instruct someone to overload by a little bit or improve the training program as the weeks progress. So they might be running 10 kilometers. So in order to overload, you might get the person to increase the distance that they are running by 10% or 2 to 10%. So you might improve the distance by, it might be 1.1 kilometer, okay, each week. Or it might be the amount of time they spend running. If they're running for an hour, you might, increase that time by a few minutes in order to increase or overload by a few minutes, right? Not even really a few minutes. You probably just do half a minute or something like that. It really depends on the timing. It's usually just a really basic calculation. Usually just overloading by 10% by increasing the distance is the easiest way to go. If you get number of reps, you might increase the number of reps by about 2 to 10%. Don't try and hit 10% every time. If you can do less than 10%, that's fine. But yeah, 2 to 10% is usually the golden rule. Okay, in terms of specificity, this refers to making the training program as similar to the sport as possible. This includes things such as major movements, fitness components, energy systems, work-to-rest ratios, and intensity levels. And it's also why an activity analysis is essential, so that these factors can be replicated in a training program. So if you're training for a soccer game, you don't really want to use, maybe netball-based training methods. It won't be useful for your soccer game. It won't be specific to the soccer game. You'll have different work-to-rest ratios, you'll have different intensity levels, different fitness components or movements or energy systems being employed. And so you want to kind of tailor your training toward the sport that you're training for. So that one's pretty straightforward. And that's the S in spit off. In terms of individuality, it's about tailoring training programs to the individual. So for example, a person with more slow twitch muscle fibers will respond better to aerobic training, while a person with fast twitch fibers will respond better to anaerobic speed or training. Anaerobic or speed training. Yeah, so as I mentioned before, my family typically has always been like more of a cross-country running family, so we like generally probably have more slow twitch muscle fibers, right? Which is why I guess most of my family prefers to run longer distance as opposed to short distance. Whereas some people might be more predisposed to having fast twitch fibers, right? And so they may be more responsive to anaerobic or speed training. And so you might want to tailor your training programs towards these different genetic differences, okay? You're just making them more specific to the individual. Okay, this can be quite a complex one if you haven't looked at it before. I think it's really interesting. So as people get fitter, their fitness improvements tend to occur more slowly. Untrained individuals will show more rapid improvement when they undertake a training program than a trained individual completing the same program. However, the trained individual will still usually perform at a higher level. So you can see here, this is the principle of diminishing returns. They often describe it as the principle of diminishing returns in the VCE exam, and you often have to define it, and that's a really common exam question. So you'll see here you've got trained individual versus untrained individual. If someone is trained, you can see that it's kind of like a plateau. This is kind of like level of performance or improvements. This person's performance is nearly flat, like maybe over 6 months' time, they only increase a tiny bit, right? This is because they're pretty much already near to their genetic potential. So eventually a point where like you can't get better. You're like as close to like this would be someone like Roger Federer in tennis, right? This wouldn't be just some like person just training for fun. This would be like an elite athlete. So they're probably extremely close to their like genetic potential, and so they're like nearly as high as they possibly can get, right? And so they can train and they can get better. It's just going to be a lot slower for these improvements to actually occur, right? If someone is an untrained athlete, like I totally suck at tennis. If I just picked up a tennis racket today, I would be terrible at it. But as the weeks progress, I would start to see improvements very rapidly, okay? Because I would start to like understand the game. I would start to like, observe my opponent's movements or predict how they will respond and get better. And so my improvements will be like, it'll be a sharper or a steeper incline here, as you can see. And so it's not saying that I'm better than Roger Federer, however, it's just saying that I'm reaping faster improvements. I obviously won't get to this level. Maybe my genetic potential is just like here for tennis, or maybe it is up here, but over like many, many years, I'll have to train, right, in order to get to that area. And so, yeah, what this is really saying is not that you'll improve better than an elite athlete. It's just saying that elite athletes have already trained so much. They've already experienced these rapid improvements like way younger, okay? And so if they keep training, they're going to improve. They're just going to improve very slowly. Whereas someone who's just picked up the sport and is just starting now, probably at a cognitive level, they will start to experience quite rapid improvements. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. I know it was a bit convoluted. If you have questions, put them in the chat and I will respond. Okay, variety. So variety during training sessions is important to ensure that the athlete remains interested or motivated. Simple ways to add variety to a training program include running different routes or completing training in a different place. And variety can often clash with specificity. So if I run the same running track every single day, I often get bored. So I might swap down the street, go down another street, or explore a different trail, or go on a run with friends or something like that. So having these different routes kind of is fun. It keeps me interested, keeps me wanting to like go running. I'll be like, oh, tomorrow I'll go down this track instead, or this trail. It's kind of exciting. So this can keep providing motivation to an athlete, especially when they are training quite consistently, especially for a big event. It may clash with specificity, so you might switch up your training program to try and do more continuous training for a marathon, or you might do like fartlek training, or you might do very short bursts of training, and then if you do the short bursts of training, that may not be conducive to training for a marathon. So you really need to make sure that your training is actually kind of like engineered toward actually improving the particular skill or event you're training for. We've got maintenance. This refers to holding on to or keeping fitness gains that occur during an intense period of training. Okay, so you've got to hold on to these fitness gains in order to maintain your previous fitness gains, you've got to train at least twice a week. So maintain is training twice a week. Improving is training 3 times a week at least. Another thing to note, which we'll discuss in detail later on in your classes, I'm sure, is that you can lose these gains a lot faster than you can take to actually reap them or gain them, which is very annoying if you get injured or you stop training for a while, because you kind of like, you may reset back to factory reset or starting up from zero again, which can be quite irritating. But your body will work out how it used to run or whatever, and you'll get better. So that was kind of like a tangent, but just really making sure you understand that maintenance is important. Otherwise, if you don't maintain, you can you'll start to detrain or lose improvements. Okay, so this kind of coincides with what I was just saying. Okay, first we'll discuss overtraining, and this occurs when an athlete doesn't give themselves sufficient recovery time between training sessions. It can cause long-term decreases in performance levels, and a key reason as to why it's important to include rest days. So sometimes you might be like in the zone for like running or playing a sport, and you might go, yeah, I'm gonna train every day today, which like sounds good on paper, like yes, lots of improvement, lots of training, it's really good, but it doesn't give you enough time to recover. And even if you feel fine, like psychologically, often your body will have like micro tears in the muscles which need to be repaired, or DOMs which you can't really get around, stuff like that. It's really important to take rest days. Another main problem with overtraining is that you often increase or decrease motivation. So if you're running every single day, you've kind of made it a chore for yourself. You're not getting days off, or you might want to watch TV and you're like, okay, I'm going to go run instead. So all of that can be quite detrimental to an athlete, and it can lead to lack of motivation, and yeah, it can be bad for the performance. Cool. Detraining is also known as reversibility. It refers to the potential loss of fitness that was gained during a training program. If training is completely stopped, a loss of previously achieved fitness gains will occur. So in around 3 weeks of no training, both cardiac output and VO2 max can decrease by up to 8%, while after 12 weeks it can drop by as much as 18%. Not fun. But you can obviously train up again, follow a training program, and get those benefits back. All training programs should ideally incorporate all of the relevant training principles. A key skill with training principles on stats and exams is picking up principles that have been incorporated correctly or incorrectly into a training program. That's a really common thing you've got to do. My advice is to stick to the easy ones, such as frequency, duration, intensity, and progression or overload. These are easy to discuss. Often if it's duration, you can just increase the time by a few minutes or a few seconds, something like that. You can reduce rest time as well. Increasing intensity is always quite easy too if you're doing like a muscular type thing. You can just increase the amount of weight you're actually moving. Yeah. You don't get extra points for picking a harder concept, so just stick to easy ones. So in studying for this area of study, you must be able to identify training principles that have been incorporated correctly, and those which have been incorporated incorrectly into a training program. As I mentioned, pick the easy ones. Know about specificity and how to explain it. So the training for football should replicate the major movements, muscle groups, and energy systems used during a match of football and be performed at appropriate intensities. For example, if training to be a full forward, short, high-intensity burst of training, such as short sprint, should be performed to replicate leading for a mark. So you just want to make it as specific as possible, okay? This is a question that commonly appears in one form or another. So you really want to make sure that your training program is specific to the particular event, okay? And kind of like identify how it is, or what skills you're replicating, or what work to rest ratios, or heart rates, or intensities, all that stuff we covered right at the start of this lecture. Discuss that. Be able to explain or write how progression or overload could be applied to a specific program. Keep it simple, so durations could be increased in a run. This is really easy to apply. Remember, never overload by more than 10%, and kind of keep within the range of 2 to 10%. Cool. Okay, it looks like we have got a few, I think. Okay, we might not get tons of time to go over revision tips. If you have questions about revision tips, tricks, put them in the chat now. Okay, we do have like, okay, we should be fine. Okay, so we're going to be discussing some training methods including continuous, interval, short, intermediate, long, and high intensity, fartlek, circuit, weight resistance, flexibility, and plyometrics. The continuous training So this involves performing activities such as riding a bike or running for a long period of time, quite non-stop. It targets the aerobic energy system and is 70 to 85% of max heart rate. Has a number of health-related benefits and also has low injury rates. It's pretty easy to get into continuous training. Like I literally, during high school, the pandemic or something, I went from like running 5 kilometers a day to like training for a half marathon. Like it's really easy to do this at home. That's the main benefit of it. You don't need like a coach or an external person in order to do this. You can literally pull up like a training program online and just do it yourself. So I would say that's the main benefit. You have to describe benefits for each of these. Just discuss that you don't need an external coach. Low injury rates is quite easy to do. As you can see here, we've actually got 70 to 85% max heart rate. So this is what I talked about before, that big ugly table. That's actually useful. You can see here, continuous training is an aerobic energy system training method. It actually fits within that range of 70 to 85% max heart rate. So it's useful, right? Fartlek training is a Swedish word, so fartlek refers to like speed play. So it involves continuous running or jogging with high intensity bursts or random length. Key difference from interval training. So I actually have an app on my phone which I used to go running with, and you're like running and then it pretends that there are zombies like chasing after you, so you've got to sprint for a bit, so it's quite sporadic. And so this random zombie attack helps you to incorporate high intensity bursts of random length. Like it might be a minute the zombies are chasing after you, or like 10 seconds or 15, so it's really random. So fartlek's pretty random. It's not like governed by, okay, every minute we're going to start sprinting. It's just random, and that's the main difference with fartlek from interval, which we'll look at soon. And it targets both the aerobic and anaerobic energy systems. We've got, next up, circuit training, which is like, you might be in the gym and you've got a bunch of different stations, and you perform different activities at each station. You might at one station do star jumps, you might do push-ups, you might do, skipping at one station. So you've got lots of different stations. You can target a number of different components here, and it's a great way to add variety and can easily be overloaded. We've got interval training, so we've got 3 different types of interval training. What this is periods of high intensity which are interspersed with periods of rest, and the level of the work and rest periods can be changed to target different energy systems and fitness components. So short interval training is where your work periods under 10 seconds in length and work to rest ratio is about 1 to 6. The ATP PC system is dominant. So short interval, short bursts, I just think it's a fast event, so ATP PC system. Making sure you know these work to rest ratios, I would say about 1 to 5 to 1 to 6 for the short interval training, meaning 1 minute of work, 6 minutes of rest, or 10 seconds of work. I wouldn't say 1 minute, it's 10 seconds, sorry. 10 seconds of work, 50 seconds of rest, or 60 seconds of rest. In terms of medium interval training, the work period is between 10 and 60 seconds. So the work to rest ratio is around 1 to 2 or 1 to 3, and it targets the anaerobic glycolysis system, so you can build lactate tolerance here. Sorry, I think I said 3 before. I kind of classify HIIT as a different type of interval training, but it is a type of interval training. Long interval training is where you've got a work period of at least 1 minute. It's a work to rest ratio of 1 to 1 or more. So 1 minute of work, 1 minute of rest, or 1 minute of work, 50 seconds of rest. Something like that. So you've got more work than rest or equal work and rest. The aerobic system is dominant. It can increase your lactate inflection point if done at a high intensity. So if you want to increase your lactate inflection point by putting off like how long it is before you actually start to have too much lactate being produced, you can actually train using long interval training. Next up we have HIIT, which is high intensity interval training. It's like a new training method. It's been around for like 10 years, but it's still kind of like a radical training method, I guess. It involves periods of short, high intensity work, so about 10 to 30 seconds, followed by periods of reduced intensity recovery. So you might sprint for 30 seconds, jog for 10 seconds. Sprint, 30 seconds, jog for 10 seconds. And it's quite like, not regulated, but like it will have these designated times, whereas fartlek is very random or sporadic. The main thing that this system targets is the aerobic system, and it results in aerobic chronic adaptations. The main advantages of this, like if you look at magazines like Runner's World or something, people will rave about HIIT because it takes a lot faster to do. So people are always like, in these magazines, you can do HIIT in your lunch break and get the same benefits as running for, an hour in 30 minutes by doing this HIIT training, by, high intensity, 30 seconds, short intensity, 10 seconds, something like that. So yeah, it is quite a fast method of training. It's very quick. And you can still get the same benefits purportedly. Okay? Okay, time is okay. Sneeze. So resistance training, we've got sorry guys. Okay. In terms of resistance training, we've got weight training. This can increase muscular strength as well as muscular power and speed. There's a high risk of injury involved here, so you kind of want to make sure you know what you're doing, or you have a personal trainer or coach helping you out. It's also got quite a high level of intensity. Here is another table. I would also recommend memorizing this one. I didn't memorize this one in high school, and I had a lot of trouble in the exam in this section because I didn't remember what repetition weights are required for each of these different components. So muscular strength, muscular hypertrophy, muscular power, and endurance. You must know these. Just this entire table. So no repetition weight is percentage of max rep, 60-70 for muscular strength, 70-85 for this one, 30-60, 40-60. All of them are 1 to 3 sets, which is fine, easy to remember. Just knowing that muscular power, because it's quite a fast movement, it's a fast repetition speed, whereas the rest is slow to moderate. And then in terms of number of reps, you might have 3 to 6 for muscular power, so quite a small amount for muscular power, because it's fast, whereas you might have muscular reps have 15 to 25 reps, because it is for a prolonged period of time. So prolonged period of time, but also less weight. It's quite a small amount of weight. Whereas this one, it's kind of like a middle-ish amount of weight with small reps, but it's faster movements, okay? Whereas hypertrophy, if you want to have like bigger muscles, you might want to do 70 to 85% repetition max reps and 8-12 reps, or muscular strength, 60 to 70% of maximum repetitions and 8 to 12 reps. Okay, so this is just something you have to memorize, which is annoying, I know, but it will help you in the long run. So if you can like print out this table, or then maybe draw your own table and just try and fill in the blanks every few days, that will help you. Okay, I think my box where I'm in is like in the corner of the screen here. I can't see it right now, but it might be blocking the visual. What this visual is really just a bunch of people like skipping, tuck ropes, long jumps. It's just kind of demonstrating different methods of plyometric training, which is just jumping. So plyometric is just kind of like powerful, explosive movements. It focuses on developing muscular power. It generally involves standing jumps, and it uses something known as the stretch reflex, which is when the body initiates a concentric contraction before a rapid eccentric contraction to prevent overstretching of the muscles. Example of this is how we bend at the knees and hips before jumping vertically. So clear safety guidelines should be followed. Okay, so bending, jumping. It's just really explosive jumping movements. It's pretty much plyometrics. You often need to, there should be a bit more info here. No? Some things to keep in mind here is that you probably need a coach or a personal trainer there to make sure that you don't get injured, because it is quite an injury-prone activity. And making sure you have like flat solid shoes, you're on like flat footing, not like an incline or anything. Stuff like that's important as well. We've got flexibility training, which is for flexibility type sports, I guess, like yoga. Increased flexibility can lead to increased performance by allowing for increased speed, strength, and power. It can also reduce the chance of injury. There are 4 different types of stretches. Static stretching, where you stretch to a position and hold it for 10 seconds or more. This is better used at the end of a session. You've got dynamic stretching, which is moving your joint through its full range of motion in a controlled manner, and it should be done during a warm-up. You've got ballistic stretching, which is the same as dynamic stretching, but with much greater force, a much higher chance of injury, and should only be performed in very few circumstances and not advisable in general for athletes. And then you've got PNF, which is proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation stretching. The participant moves the muscle through its range of motion until discomfort is felt. Then the muscle is contracted isometrically, no change in length for 6 seconds. The muscle is then slightly relaxed before being stretched isometrically for another 6 seconds. You don't have to write down proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation. You can just write PNF, and that's perfectly fine. Okay, just a bit on tips for this area of study. Knowing which energy systems and fitness components each training method predominantly trains is really important. Know a couple of advantages for each type of training, and remember that high intensity interval training is an aerobic training method that leads to aerobic chronic adaptations such as increased LIP. If you're having trouble with HIIT, I recommend going to the VCAR website and looking up advice for teachers, HIIT explained, stuff like that, because there is a bit more info on HIIT because it's kind of like a new training method. But yeah, I think it's pretty straightforward. If you have a trouble with it, just put a question in the chat. Something else I recommend is memorizing those tables. I know it's tedious and boring to remember percentages and numbers, but it's going to be quite useful to you in the exam, and I highly, highly, highly recommend it. Okay? So please do that.